Hello students, my name is Dr. Ashutosh and in today's lecture we are going to understand a very interesting and important topic of the shoulder complex biomechanics, which is the biomechanics of the glenohumeral joint. Till now we have studied the biomechanics of the sternoclavicular joint, acromioclavicular joint, and now it's the time to study an important joint of the shoulder complex, which is your glenohumeral joint. This is the joint which is formed between the glenoid cavity of the scapula and the humerus bone, the arm bone, which is present in the arm. So let's start today's lecture, but before starting the glenohumeral joint, I want you to understand this concept that the scapulothoracic joint, which is a false joint, is also present in the shoulder complex, and the movements at this false joint is actually decided by the two other joints of the shoulder complex, which is your sternoclavicular joint and acromioclavicular joint. So what happens is that the movement at SC and AC occur, and the resultant of that movement we see in the scapula. So in scapula there are three movements which are present. First is your elevation and depression, other movement is your protraction and retraction, and the third movement is the upward and downward rotation. So basically these three movements are present at the scapulothoracic joint, which is decided by the movements at the SC and AC joint. So for example, when we are talking about the scapulothoracic or the scapular elevation, then it occurs as a result of the sternoclavicular elevation. As you can see, in the scapular elevation your clavicle bone actually elevates. So this is happening because at the sternoclavicular joint there is elevation, and there is also downward rotation at the acromioclavicular joint. These two motions result in the scapular elevation. So this was the first example about how the scapular motion is decided by the movements at the sternoclavicular and acromioclavicular joint. The other movement which occurs at this joint is protraction. So this protraction actually occurs by the SC protraction plus horizontal plane adjustment. And what are the horizontal plane adjustments at AC joint? It is your internal and external rotations. So protraction happens as well as the horizontal plane adjustment occurs, which causes the scapular protraction. And the last but not the least movement is your scapular upward rotation, and it occurs as a result of the sternoclavicular elevation plus acromioclavicular upward rotation. So this was about the scapulothoracic joint, in which the movement was occurring because of the movements at the SC and AC joint. This is a very important concept to understand before we understand the glenohumeral joint mechanics. So I hope this is clear with you that what is the movement that happens at the scapulothoracic joint and how they are decided by the movements occurring at the SC and AC joint. This concept will play a very crucial role in the coming slides and is very important in understanding the biomechanics of the GH joint. So now let's start with the general features of the glenohumeral joint. It is the joint between the humerus and the scapula, and if I talk specifically, then the large convex head of the humerus is articulating with the shallow concavity of the glenoid fossa. Your convex head of the humerus is very large compared to the glenoid fossa. Also, there are two peculiar things about the head of the humerus, that it is in the superior-medial direction. It is slightly superior and in the medial direction, plus it is anteversion, which means it is rotated anteriorly because it has to accommodate with your glenoid fossa of the scapula. So that is why your head of humerus is anteversion and it is in superior-medial direction. And the two bones are your convex head of the humerus and the glenoid cavity, which forms the glenohumeral joint. Now I understand this thing, and I believe that you have seen the golf. So whenever a player is hitting the golf ball, so there is a small socket on which he or she keeps the ball, and then with the help of the stick he hits the ball. So imagine that socket as your glenoid cavity, and that large ball is your convex head. So this is how approximately 2 times greater than the glenoid cavity is the diameter of the head of humerus. So glenoid cavity, this shallow and small glenoid cavity has to accommodate this large ball. So this is actually in relation with the goals. You can understand better that how this joint is actually placed in our body. This small T or small socket is representing the glenoid fossa, and this large ball is representing the convex head of the humerus. This as you can see that there is a large head and the shallow glenoid cavity, but even then this joint is comparatively stable and does not dislocate that much easily because of the presence of the stability at this joint. This stability actually comes from the periarticular connective tissues. So there are many ligaments and muscles which are present around this joint to support this joint, because this head has to accommodate in the shallow cavity. So for that reason there is presence of these connective tissues which help in providing the stability at the glenohumeral joint. In that order, we will first understand the most important connective tissue, which is your glenohumeral ligament or the capsular ligament. This is the ligament which is present between the glenoid cavity and the humerus, and they are basically three: superior glenohumeral ligament, middle glenohumeral ligament, and inferior glenohumeral ligament. If you will see this image, then this ligament, which is actually coming from the glenoid cavity, anterior rim of the glenoid cavity, then it is coming here and attaching somewhere over here at the lesser tubercle and the anatomical neck. So this is the superior part, and this is the middle part, and the last part is the inferior glenohumeral ligament. Now let's study in deep about all these ligaments. So first of all, we must remember the attachments of the ligament. Your superior glenohumeral ligament actually comes from the supraglenoid tubercle of your glenoid cavity, and it runs and attaches to the anatomical neck just above the lesser tubercle. It is taut and it restricts the full adduction. This full adduction movement is restricted by this ligament, or inferior and posterior translation of the humerus is restricted by the superior glenohumeral ligament. Now the middle glenohumeral ligament, which is present just beneath the superior ligament, and it is coming from the superior and middle aspect of the anterior rim of the glenoid fossa, and it attaches distally along the anterior aspect of the anatomical neck, and its function is to resist the anterior translation of the humerus. And when this anterior translation of the humerus will happen? When you will externally rotate the humerus or externally rotate the shoulder, then these ligaments get taut and restricts that movement. Now the last ligament is the inferior glenohumeral ligament, which comes from inferior to the middle glenohumeral ligament, that is antero-inferior rim of the glenoid fossa, and it attaches anterior-inferior and posterior-inferior at the anatomical neck. And there is a important thing about this inferior glenohumeral ligament, that it has two bands. So there is anterior band which is present on the anterior side, and there is a posterior band which is present on the posterior side. The function of the anterior band is to resist the abduction and external rotation, while the function of the posterior band is to restrict the abduction and internal rotation, because it is present on the back side. So it will actually restrict the internal rotation. Whenever you are internally rotating, then the structures from the back are getting taut. In abduction and internal rotation, your posterior band of the inferior glenohumeral ligament will get taut. I hope this is clear to you. Now there is a concept about the hammock-like inferior capsule ligament. So this inferior capsule is actually like a hammock. Hammock is like a sling which we attaches in between two trees. So imagine there is an anterior band present on the anterior side, and there is a posterior band present on the posterior side. There is a sheet of tissue which connect these bands, and this sheet of tissue is nothing but your axillary pouch. So there is a, whenever you are in resting position of your shoulder, or you are keeping it in adducted position as I am doing it right now, so there is a pouch at the back of the axilla, and this is your axillary pouch which is formed between the anterior and posterior band of the inferior glenohumeral ligament. So it is a sheet of tissue which connects these two bands. Also, now let's see about the coracohumeral ligament. This was all about the glenohumeral ligament, which was of three types: superior, middle, and inferior. And there were two bands in the inferior ligament, which was your anterior and posterior. And the thing which is sheet of tissue which is connecting the anterior and posterior is your axillary pouch. Now, coracohumeral ligament comes from the coracoid process, as the name is suggesting that is coming from the coracoid and attaching at the humerus. So, proximally it comes from the lateral border of the coracoid process and it attaches distally on the anterior side of the greater tubercle. And the functioning of the coracohumeral ligament is to restrict the extremes of the external rotation, extremes of the flexion, extremes of the extension, and the inferior displacement, because it is present on the superior side. So it will prevent the inferior displacement of the humeral head. This is the function of the coracohumeral ligament. Also, there is a capsule, there is a sheet of a tissue which covers the whole structures that are present in the shoulder joint, and that is the capsule. It is covering all the structures like your ligaments and some muscles. Also there are bursas which are present beneath the capsule, which means it is wrapping the joint. We must understand the attachments of this capsule. So there is lateral attachment on the humerus and there is medial attachment on the glenoid. From the lateral attachment, it attaches at the anatomical neck of the humerus, and on the medial side it attaches to the glenoid and at the labrum. So this is how the capsule is oriented in the shoulder joint. Now it receives the structural reinforcement. There is one very important and interesting thing about this joint, which is that your glenohumeral joint capsule is having reinforcement from four important muscles, and these four are your rotator cuff muscles. Like subscapularis lies just anterior to the capsule, your supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor are at the superior and posterior side of the capsule, and they are coming from their origin. Like supraspinatus is coming from the supraspinatus fossa, then they come and attaches to this capsule and then they insert at the greater tubercle. So all these rotator cuff muscle, your sits, supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor and subscapularis, from their origin they come and attaches to the capsule in order to provide the additional stability. The functioning of these muscles is to actually give the strength to this capsule, so that it can stable the joint better, so that it can function in a stable way. It can provide the stability to the joint. So this is how your capsule is getting the reinforcement from the four muscles, that your SITS, that is subscapularis, supraspinatus, infraspinatus and teres minor. Now, as I told you earlier, the glenoid cavity is shallower. So in order to make it deep, there is a tissue which is present on the rim of this glenoid cavity in this circular manner, and this is your labrum. So this labrum actually helps in deepening the socket so that humeral head can fix there in a good manner. Fine. So this was all about the connective tissue which was present in the glenohumeral joint. It was your glenohumeral ligament or the capsular ligament. Then we studied about the coracohumeral ligament. Then it was the capsule, and then the important thing, your glenoid labrum. Now in biomechanics, we have to understand the static stability of the glenohumeral joint. There is very important and interesting thing in the glenohumeral joint, which is static stability. How the static stability is given to this joint. Right now I am sitting and my hand is in adducted position. It is static, it is not moving, and I am in a stable position, which means my joint is not going in downward direction or in upward direction or anterior or posterior. It is in a stable condition. This happens, and this thing is actually called as the static stability. To understand the static stability, you have to see this diagram over here. Now what is actually happening, as you can see, and we have already read in the osteological features of the shoulder complex, that your glenoid cavity or the scapular glenoid cavity is 5 degrees upwardly rotated. It is 5 degrees, it is not in straight direction, it is not in a vertical direction, it is 5 degrees upward rotated. Now this is 5 degrees upward rotated, so it helps in accommodating the glenoid head, it helps in accommodating your humeral head in a better way. If it would have been in the straight manner or in the vertical direction, then it would be a very hard for your humeral head to actually attach there, because there is no slope. But if there is slope, then it is slightly easy for the humeral head to actually accommodate at this glenoid cavity. Also, there are some superior capsular structure and supraspinatus muscle which is giving their line of force like this. So what they are doing is they are actually pulling the head of humerus in the upward direction. So this is the line of force of the supraspinatus muscle and the superior capsular structure. Then there is a gravity which is acting downward direction. So there are two force vectors. First is coming from the superior capsular structure and the other force vector is coming from the gravity. And the resultant of these two vectors is creating the compressive forces at the joint. So over here, this is the compressive forces at the joint which is happening as a resultant vector of your superior capsule structure and the glenoid cavity. If there is disruption in any of these things, then static stability will be lost. For example, if the scapula gets downwardly rotated, then this compressive force resultant vector will disturb. The arthrokinematics of the joint will get disturbed. For example, if the superior capsular structures are not working properly, if there are tear in the superior capsular structure, if there is tear in the supraspinatus, then also this capsular forces will be destroyed. So this capsular or compressive forces will not be there, which means that it is these three things: gravity, superior capsular structures, and the upwardly rotated or scapula is very important in order to maintain the static stability. Now, downward dislocation of the shoulder joint is not prevented by the vertically running muscle. So there was a study, there was an electromyographic study which was done in the shoulder joint, and it revealed that downward dislocation of the shoulder, if there is inferior dislocation of the shoulder, it will not be prevented by the vertical running muscles, which means that it will be run by the horizontal running muscles, which is your supraspinatus. Your vertically running muscles will not prevent that. So in order to maintain the static stability, in order to prevent the joint from dislocating downward, your superior capsular structures plays a very important and crucial role. Now the locking mechanism of the shoulder is dependent on three factors. First was the slope of the glenoid fossa that we already discussed. Then there was the tightening of the superior part of the capsule. The type, we know that it gets tightened and it keeps the line of force in a horizontal direction. And the activity of the supraspinatus muscle to the lesser extent, also the posterior fibers of the deltoid helps in this locking mechanism. So three things are mainly responsible. First is your slope, so that it can get better only accommodate over there. Then there was the tightening of the superior part of the capsule and the activity of the supraspinatus muscles. So whenever there is a static stability at the joint, because of this is possible because of all these three things. If there is disturbance in any one of the three factors, it can cause the inferior dislocation, or it can disrupt the normal arthrokinematics of the joint, and it will not lead to static stability. It will lead to static instability. Now, downward rotated position, we already discussed it. When this can be seen, it can be seen when there is a weakness of the upper trapezius muscle. So if there is paralysis of the upper trapezius muscle, then your scapula will get downwardly rotated, and that can actually cause in the static instability. Also, one more thing that we must know, that there is a negative intra-articular pressure within the GH joint, which offers the secondary source. It is not the primary source of static stability, it is the secondary source of static stability. Primary comes from the three things as already discussed in the previous slides, and this static stability comes from the secondary source of this intra-articular pressure. If you remove this intra-articular pressure by puncturing the joint, the air will come out and the static stability will get hampered. What actually happens is that this negative intra-articular pressure gives the suction mechanism to the joint. So it is like a vacuum that is created within the joint, so that it is actually it is pulling the head of humerus to its glenoid cavity. As you can see in this video also, when this person is dislocating the joint and then relocating the joint, then you can see that there is a air which is filled inside it, and there is a suction mechanism which is happening, which is resulting in providing the static stability. So this is a very important thing to understand, that how the static stability comes at the glenohumeral joint. It is primarily coming from the three factors, and secondarily it comes from the negative intra-articular pressures which is created within the glenohumeral joint. Now let's see a very important thing in the glenohumeral joint, which is coracoacromial arch and bursa. There is an arch above the your humeral head. It is formed by the coracoacromial ligament, which is the ligament that is connecting the coracoid process and the acromial process, and there is acromion process also. So there is acromion process, there is coracoacromial ligament. This forms the roof for the head of humerus. And this roof, the distance between the roof and the head of humerus in a normal individual is 1 centimeter. And this space is called as the subacromial space. And there is supraspinatus tendon in this. There is long head of biceps in this. And also the part of superior capsule is present between this space, which is called as subacromial space. Now, there are 8 separate bursas which are present in the shoulder joint, and the function of these fluid filled bursa is to reduce the friction. They help in reducing the friction between the muscle and muscle, or the bone and the muscle. And there are 2 important bursa. First is your subacromial bursa and the subdeltoid bursa. This bursa that you can see over here is the subacromial bursa, and this bursa is the subdeltoid bursa, which is present beneath the deltoid muscle, and it is present beneath this acromion process. Subdeltoid bursa is nothing but the extension of the subacromial bursa in the posterior direction. Now let's understand the kinematics at the glenohumeral joint. What is the move kinematics, osteokinematics and the arthrokinematics? First of all, we have to understand there is 3 degrees of freedom present, which means that movement is occurring in 3 axes: your frontal, sagittal and your vertical axis. Abduction and adduction is present, which is happening in the sagittal axis and the frontal plane. This is a very basic thing and you all are aware of it. And range of motion is 180 degrees for the abduction, and adduction it is 30 degrees. For the flexion extension, this is occurring in the frontal axis and the sagittal plane. Range of motion is around, for flexion is 180 degrees, and for extension it is 45 to 60 degrees. This is again a very basic thing. And for the internal and external rotation, the axis is vertical and the plane is transverse. The range of motion for both these are nearly 90 degrees. Now let's see the other important concept, which is the arthrokinematics. And I think you all must be understanding this very quickly, because I think you all know about the convex concave rule, which states that when the moving surface is convex, then the rolling and sliding will occur in opposite direction. If the moving surface is concave, then the rolling and sliding will occur in the same direction. So when the abduction is happening, or your humerus is going in upward direction, which means rolling is occurring superiorly, and as the moving surface is the convex, so sliding will be happening in the opposite direction. So sliding will happen inferior because rolling is superior. In the same way, rolling will be inferior and sliding will be superior in adduction movement. During abduction, the supraspinatus muscle attaches to the superior capsule of the GH joint, and force is transmitted through the capsule, providing the dynamic stability. There is a static stability and then there is a dynamic stability. What is the difference between static and dynamic stability? The difference is that the static stability is formed because of the 2 vectors, which is your gravity and the superior capsular structure and supraspinatus. So this supraspinatus is pulling it like this and gravity is like this, and then there is a resultant which is compressing this joint, which is giving the compressive forces to the joint. Then how the dynamic stability is given to the joint? Dynamic stability means that the stability that is gained when the motion is happening. So this dynamic stability actually comes from the fact that all the rotator cuff muscles attaches at the capsule. So whenever there is a movement at any joint, so this capsule is actually functioning to provide the dynamic stability, because there are the muscles attached to it. This we will study in very deep in the coming slides also. For now, let's understand this much, that supraspinatus muscle also contributes to the dynamic stability by attaching on the superior capsule of the glenohumeral joint. As the abduction proceeds, the prominent humeral head unfolds and stretches the axillary pouch of the inferior capsular ligament. This resulting tension within the inferior capsule acts as a hammock or sling. When we were studying about the glenohumeral joint, I told you that the inferior part of this glenohumeral joint functions as a hammock or sling in order to provide the inferior instability. Now let's see in this diagram how it is giving this inferior stability. So whenever you are doing the abduction, then there is a stretch in this inferior capsular ligament. So there is stretch in this inferior capsular ligament means that there is a tension in this ligament. This ligament is getting taut. So whenever this ligament is getting taut, so it is helping this head of humerus to coming downward. This head of humerus will not come downward because it is rolling like this. So it might be possible that with the sliding it can come down in the downward direction, it can get dislocated. But this is prevented because of this inferior capsular ligament. Inferior capsular ligament has the tension which is not causing this head of the humerus to move in the inferior direction. So this is how this your inferior capsular ligament provides the stability in the inferior direction. Excessive stiffness to the inferior capsule due to adhesive capsulitis may limit full extent to the abduction. This happens when there is a case of frozen shoulder and there is a adhesive capsulitis and stiffness in the joint, which is resulting why? Because there is the inferior capsule that is inflamed. There is the inflammation in the inferior capsule. This is why this may limit the full extension or the abduction. So this is how when we will see the frozen shoulder cases, then there will be limitation in the abduction movement. This is occurring why there is adhesive capsulitis. Also, we know that the abduction range at the glenohumeral joint is 180 degrees, and out of this 180 degrees only 120 degree of movement or the abduction occurs at the glenohumeral joint, and the other movement or the 60 degree of the remaining movement occurs at the scapula. So at the glenohumeral joint only 120 degrees abduction is happening, and the rest 60 degrees coming with the help of the scapula. And we know till now that whenever the abduction is occurring at the GH joint, then the scapulothoracic joint must upwardly rotate in order to accommodate the abduction. So you see by yourself also, whenever you are abducting, your scapula is actually going in the upward direction. Upward rotation is happening at your scapula, which means 120 degrees of abduction is coming from the glenohumeral joint, and rest of the 60 degree of abduction is coming from the scapulothoracic joint upward rotation. There is importance. We all are discussing about the functioning of the glenohumeral joint, how we are discussing about the functioning of the glenohumeral joint, how it is happening. So we have seen till now that the rolling and sliding is occurring whenever the rolling is there, then sliding is also there. They are occurring together. So they are not occurring separately. Rolling is occurring, also sliding is occurring at the same time. So what is happening, what is the need of this sliding is that if sliding is not there, then your head of humerus will roll in the upward direction in a greater way. There will be translation of the head of humerus in the upward direction, which will cause the roof which was formed by the acromion arch, acromion process, coracoacromial arch. So what will happen, your head of humerus and your acromion will get impinged, will cause the impingement of the tissues that is present beneath them. So they will come and they will go and attach to each other, and all the tissues which are present between them will get compressed and will get damaged. So sliding is important to prevent the superior translation of the head of humerus, so that it does not go and attaches to the acromion process or the coracoacromial ligament. So this is all written in this slide. Now frontal plane and scapular plane. We should understand that how the scapula is actually present in our body. So it is not present in a fixed frontal plane. It is present 35 degrees anterior to the frontal plane. There is an exercise which you can do right now. Internally rotate your shoulder and try to abduct it. You will face some difficulty in abducting it. Now what you do is you take your arm into 35 degree abduction. Now in whole internal rotation only, you take it into 35 degrees of abduction and now do the abduction. Then you will see you are able to complete the abduction. Why this is happening? Because right now the movement is occurring at the scapular plane. So whenever the movement is occurring at the scapular plane, it is easy to elevate the arm. So this is the basic difference between the frontal plane abduction and the scapular plane abduction. And most of our activities of daily life we do in the scapular plane, not in the frontal plane. Now this was all about the osteokinematics of the shoulder joint. We studied the movements which was occurring at the joint. Abduction and adduction, we saw the arthrokinematics also, how the superior rolling is there and sliding is in the inferior direction. Now let's see about the flexion and extension. In the flexion and extension, there is no rolling and sliding is happening. It is occurring strictly in the sagittal plane, not in the scapular plane. It involves a spinning. So humeral head is actually spinning in order to do the flexion, and then it is spinning again in the backward direction to do the extension. This is how the flexion and extension is occurring at your glenohumeral joint. There is no rolling or sliding which happens at the glenohumeral joint. Flexion is associated with slight internal rotation also. You can see whenever you are trying to do a flexion, there is a slight internal rotation which happens. As glenohumeral joint is flexed beyond 90 degrees, tension in the stretched coracohumeral ligament may produce a small amount of internal rotation. Why this internal rotation is there? Because whenever you are flexing it, your coracohumeral ligament, which is coming from the coracoid process and attaches to the humerus, there is a tension in this. So because of that tension, your arm gets into internal rotation. So remember, whenever there is a flexion and extension, there is some amount of rotation also which happens. And we know that 120 degrees of flexion are available, and for 180 degrees of flexion accompanies upward rotation. Like abduction, there also you need upward rotation of the scapula to occur in order to complete the flexion, and full extension of the shoulders occur at 45 to 50 degrees in the backward direction. Now let's see the external and internal rotation arthrokinematics. So what is happening when you are doing external rotation? Your humerus is going in the backward direction, which means the rolling is occurring in the posterior direction. And as a rule, as the convex surface is moving, so rolling and sliding will be occurring in opposite direction. So sliding will be anterior. In internal rotation, your rolling will be anterior because the head of humerus, or it is coming in the anterior direction, and sliding will be opposite to that, which is your posterior direction. This is a very easy concept to understand when you know the convex concave rule. Then you don't need to remember the sliding and rolling direction. You can get this by applying that concept for each and every joint. So always just remember the convex concave rule, and rest everything is very easy to understand. For 75 degrees also there is sliding is happening in order to prevent the posterior roll. So without a concurrent anterior slide, the head will displace posteriorly roughly around 38 millimeters. So this amount of translation completely disarticulates the joint, because the entire transverse diameter of the glenoid fossa is only 1 to 2 millimeters. So imagine if there is no sliding which is happening in the glenohumeral joint. So when you will do the external rotation, in 75 degrees of external rotation, 38 mm, which is 3.8 centimeter head will be displaced in the posterior direction. But this does not happen. If this would have been happened, then your joint would be dislocated, because only 1 to 2 millimeter of posterior translation is possible because of this transverse diameter. So because sliding is there, then your head will not roll that much into the posterior direction. There will be no translation of the head in the backward direction. This is the importance of sliding. Sliding is important for the abduction and adduction also, and sliding is very important for your external and internal rotation also. So this is what I was telling you in the external rotation. So this is the infraspinatus muscle which is contracting, and this is the subscapulary structure, subscapulary stretch, which is present in the anterior side. This is the direction of rolling, and this is the direction of sliding. Now scapulohumeral rhythm. This was first, scapulohumeral rhythm is, I think, the most important thing in shoulder joint to understand after the force couple. So this is the second important thing in joint to understand. So in there was a scientist, Codman. So Codman first stated that there is some relationship between the scapular and humeral movement. Then Inman and colleagues did a research, and then they found out that the scapulohumeral rhythm is actually 2:1, which means scapular abduction occurs in two parts, and one part is of your scapulothoracic upward rotation. So whole range of motion at the shoulder abduction is 180 degrees. Fine. So out of this 180 degrees, two parts, which is 120 degrees of GH abduction is occurring, and 60 degrees scapulothoracic upward rotation happens. So this is how scapulohumeral rhythm is present in our body. So it is 2:1, and there were some studies after this which stated that this is slightly different. In some studies it was 2.8:1, in some studies it was 3.1, and in some it was 3.2 or 2.9. But still the 2:1 is stated the most of the times, and it is cited in the most of the times that scapulohumeral rhythm is only 2:1, which means 120 degrees at the GH joint and 60 degrees at the scapulothoracic joint. Now let's understand how this is occurring, scapulohumeral rhythm. So in order to understand this, we divide the shoulder movement, shoulder abduction movement in two parts. First is your early phase, which is up to the 90 degrees. Then there is the late phase, which is from the 90 degrees to the 180 degrees. So from 0 to 90 degrees, two parts, which is your 60 degrees movement will be at the GH joint according to scapulohumeral rhythm, because there is always 2:1, and 30 degrees will be at the ST joint. So till now 60 degrees at the HG joint and 30 degree at the ST joint. And from the previous slides in this lecture, we understand very well that the scapulothoracic movement is decided actually from the two joints, which is your sternoclavicular joint and the acromioclavicular joint. So the movements at the ST and AC decides the movement at the ST joint. So for this 30 degrees of ST upward rotation, 20 to 25 degrees of motion comes from the sternoclavicular joint and 5 to 10 degrees of motion comes from the AC joint. 20 to 25 degrees from SC joint and 5 to 10 degrees from AC joint till now. Now then there is a late phase which is from 90 degrees to 180 degrees. In 90 degrees to 180 degrees, 60 degrees again come from the GH joint and 30 degrees from the ST joint. And in this 30 degrees from the ST joint, 5 to 10 comes from the sternoclavicular joint and 20 to 25 come from the acromioclavicular joint. So this is how it is different from the early phase where most of the movement was coming from the sternoclavicular joint, and in this phase most of the movement is coming from the acromioclavicular joint. This we can understand by this graph also. So what this graph is depicting? This is depicting the shoulder abduction degrees and the motion of the joints. Okay, so this is the shoulder abduction range and this is the motion of this your scapulothoracic range. Now as you can see, this is the early phase, and in this early phase most of the movement is occurring in the ST joint elevation, and there is less movement, around 10 degrees movement was there at the AC joint upward rotation. From this 90 degrees, now the AC joints comes into the picture and it goes till the 30 degrees, and from here the ST joint is elevating and going to till the 30 degrees. So in the early phase, which joint was dominating? Your SC joint, and in the late phase which joint is dominating? Your AC joint. So this was all about your AC joint. Now there is one interesting thing to understand, which is about the posterior clavicular rotation. What is the mechanics of the posterior clavicular rotation? So whenever you will try to abduct your arm, you will see that there is some amount of posterior rotation at the clavicle occurring. Why this posterior rotation occurs at the clavicle? There is an interesting phenomena which happens. What happens is, when we were studying about remember when we were studying about the coracoacromioclavicular ligament, we studied this in acromioclavicular joint in the previous section. These ligaments come from the lateral tip of the coracoid, and it has two parts, right? The conoid part and the trapezoid part, which attaches on the clavicle. So whenever we are abducting, these ligaments get taut. This is because these ligaments gets taut, you cannot reach the full abduction. So what happens is, your clavicles get posteriorly rotated. So then there is a slack of this ligament. Now you can take your arm further because this ligament is slacked. This is happening why? Because the clavicle posterior rotation is present over here, which was resulting because of this taut coracoclavicular ligament. So this is the reason why coracoclavicular ligament is inducing the posterior rotation of the clavicle. If this posterior clavicle rotation will not be present in the joint, then you will never be able to complete the full range of abduction. In order to complete the full range of abduction, you need to have this posterior clavicular rotation. By the taut coracoclavicular ligament, clavicle rotates posteriorly so that complete abduction can occur. This we already studied. Now this is again depicting the same posterior rotation of the clavicle by the graph. In the early motions, you see there is only 10 degrees of roughly posterior rotation. When your arm is getting into 120 degrees, then there is sudden rise in the posterior rotation and it goes till the 40 degrees. When we were studying the sternoclavicular joint, then only I told you that this posterior rotation, this is the rotation which is occurring at the clavicle. It plays a crucial role in abducting the glenohumeral joint. So without this posterior rotation, it is not possible to abduct the glenohumeral joint. Now this was all about the periarticular connective tissue, general features of the joint, your osteokinematics, arthrokinematics. We studied something about the static stability. Then we saw what is the dynamic stability and how it is given by the rotator cuff muscles. Then we saw the posterior clavicular rotations and all these things. Now we will study about the kinetics and the muscles and joint interaction of the glenohumeral joint. First of all, we will divide all the muscles of the shoulder joint into two parts. So the proximal muscles will work as a proximal stabilizer and the distal muscle will work as a distal mobilizers. So what are these proximal stabilizers? These are the muscles that is originating on the spine, ribs and the cranium, and they are inserting on the scapula and clavicle. For example, your trapezius, serratus anterior, they are coming from the spine or either from the ribs, and then they are attaching to the scapula and the clavicle. Now there is distal mobilizers. So these are the muscles that originate on the scapula and clavicle, and they get inserted on the humerus. So their function is to actually provocate the movement of the humerus joint. So that is why they are called as the distal mobilizers. These are your deltoid, biceps, brachia, and all the muscles like your coracobrachialis. Now in order for mobilizers to work optimally, scapula must be stabilized against the thorax by the stabilizers. Both the muscles have an important function, your stabilizers also, your mobilizers also. If mobilizers have to work, then your scapula must be stabilized. And how the scapula is stabilized? By the help of the stabilizers muscles, which is your proximal stabilizer. Now let's study the scapulothoracic joint muscles. So in scapulothoracic joint we will see the elevation, depression, protraction, retraction. Fine. And in the upward and downward rotation. First, your elevators are three main muscles, which is your upper trapezius, levator scapulae, and some to a lesser extent rhomboids also. Rhomboids major and rhomboids minor. So this is the origin and insertion of the rhomboids minor and major muscle. The rhomboids minor muscle is coming from the spinous process of the C7 and T1, and it is inserting on the root of the spine of the scapula. And the rhomboids major muscle over here is actually coming from the T2 to T5, and it is inserting in the vertebral border on the rhomboids major is inserting on the medial border of your scapula. Then this is your levator scapulae, which is originating from the C1 to C4 transverse process, and it is inserting at the superior angle of the scapula. These muscles functions in the elevating the scapula. This is your trapezius muscle, which is originating from the occipital bone. They are originating from the medial nuchal line, ligamentum nuchae, some spinous process of the C7 and T12, and then they are getting inserted at the lateral clavicle, acromion, and spine of the scapula. So in the spine of scapula, acromion, and the lateral clavicle, they get attached, and they have three parts. First is your upper trapezius, this is your middle trapezius, and this is your lower trapezius. Then depressor. The depressor is your lower trapezius, latissimus dorsi, pectoralis minor, and subclavius muscle. This is your latissimus dorsi, which is coming from the iliac crest, thoracolumbar fascia, the spinous process of T7 to L5, and from the inferior angle of the scapula, and then it gets inserted at the intertubercular groove and the floor of the intertubercular sulcus. Then there is a subclavius muscle, which is originating from the first rib of the costal cartilage, and it is inserting on the subclavian groove. This is your pectoralis minor muscle. This is coming out from the third, fourth, and fifth rib and inserting at the coracoid process. So these all were your depressors, and these depressors are keenly important or very important in the wheelchair patient. So whenever the patient is on the wheelchair and he has to lift from the chair, what he does is he actually keeps his arm like this and he depresses the scapula, and as the action and reaction, your body gets lifted in the upward direction. This helps in relieving the pressure from the ischial tuberosity. When this is happening, actually you can reveal the pressure from the ischial tuberosity, which is generated by the prolonged sitting. So this is an important function of this depressor muscle. Now protractor, there is one primary protractor, which is your serratus anterior or the boxer's muscle. This is originating from the first 8 digitization or 9 digitization from the 9 ribs, and it gets inserted at the scapula in the medial border of the scapula. Then serratus anterior is functioning in the late phase of your push-up. Whenever a person is doing push-up, in the early phase triceps is working and pectoralis is working, and in the final component your serratus anterior is working, as you can see in this diagram also. So whenever you have to train the serratus anterior, actually you have to ask the person to do the terminal phase of the push-up. Retractors. The retractors primarily muscle is your medial trapezius, and secondary is your rhomboids and the lower trapezius, and we have seen the origin and insertion of all these three muscles. Till now we have seen the movements of the scapulothoracic joints. We saw the elevation and depression and what are the muscles which were responsible for the elevation and depression movement. Then we saw the protraction and retraction, and we saw the muscles which were causing the protraction and retraction movement. In the movements of the scapula, till now we have not seen the movements like upward and downward rotation. We will study them with the movements of the arm, because we know whenever we are elevating the arm, we can elevate the arm in the form of flexion, or we can elevate the arm in the form of abduction. Whenever we are doing these two motions, we are actually upwardly rotating the scapula. In order to rotate the scapula in the upward direction, there is a force couple which works in very important fashion in order to rotate the scapula in upward direction, that we are going to see in the couple of slides. Now the muscles which are responsible for the elevation of the arm. So there are some glenohumeral muscles which are responsible, then there are some scapulothoracic joint muscles, and then the important rotator cuff muscles. We will see the functioning of these muscles one by one. First of all, let's see what are the muscles that cause the flexion of the shoulder joint. There are three main muscles which result in the flexion, which is your anterior deltoid, coracobrachialis, and long head of the biceps. And there is one revise for you, that whenever there is a revision for you, that whenever we are doing the flexion, the arm gets internally rotated. The arms gets internally rotated because there is a stretch in a ligament which is your coracohumeral ligament. So it is always that your whenever we are doing a flexion, an internal rotation of the humerus will occur. This we studied in the previous lecture. So this was just a revision for you. Now we will see the anterior deltoid muscle. So your deltoid actually has three fibers. So there is anterior fiber which is coming from the lateral clavicle, then there is a middle fiber which comes from the acromion process, and there is the posterior fibers which come from the spine of the scapula. So all these fibers come, they converge and insert at the deltoid tuberosity. Here you can see this deltoid tuberosity is present, and this is present in the humerus. Now the other flexor muscle is the coracobrachialis. As the name is suggesting, coracoid which means the coracoid process, it is originating from the coracoid process and it is getting inserted at the brachialis, which is the arm bone. This is your humerus, so it gets inserted at the anterior and middle shaft of the humerus. So these are the muscles which cause the flexion, your anterior deltoid, coracobrachialis, and long head of the biceps. We know that the long head of the biceps actually originates from the supraglenoid tubercle. Fine. Now let's see what are the muscles that cause the abduction. So there are two main muscles. The primary muscles is your middle deltoid and supraspinatus. And both these middle deltoid and supraspinatus also have the internal moment arm. So whenever the abduction is occurring, there is also slight internal moment arm of these muscles which is essentially constant. So these are constant. These moment arm, internal moment arm is not changing. That is roughly around 25 mm throughout the most of the abduction. So for those who do not know what is an internal moment arm, you must go and watch our first video of this biomechanics series, which was about the levers, and in which we discussed what is the external moment arm and what is the internal moment arm. So internal moment arm is a fixed perpendicular distance from the fixed point fulcrum to the point of insertion of the muscle. So for internal rotation, it is almost fixed for the middle deltoid and supraspinatus, that it is 25 millimeter throughout the abduction. Now your deltoid and supraspinatus muscle also contribute to the equally they contribute to the abduction. So 50% abduction force comes from the deltoid and the 50% comes from the supraspinatus. But an interesting and a catch over here is that when deltoid will get paralyzed, the supraspinatus is capable of fully abducting the GH joint. But if the supraspinatus is paralyzed or ruptured, you cannot, or it is very difficult to actually achieve the abduction due to the altered arthrokinematics. Till now, we must know that supraspinatus is very important in order to provide the static stability, because it is pulling the head of the humerus in the upward direction and there is a gravity in the downward direction, and the resultant force is causing the compression. Also, the supraspinatus is attached to the superior part of the capsule, which makes it an important dynamic stabilizer. So these important and wide function of supraspinatus in the arthrokinematics of shoulder joint makes it a very important muscle. So if supraspinatus is paralyzed, then abduction cannot occur. If middle deltoid is paralyzed, abduction can occur because supraspinatus is intact at that time. When we are abducting the arm, both the muscles are responsible 50 and 50%, but if one of them gets ruptured, if the muscle is deltoid, then the abduction can occur. If the muscle is supraspinatus, then the abduction is not possible. So upward rotation of this scapulothoracic joint, or the force couple at this scapulothoracic joint. In the previous slides, I told you that I consider this concept to be one of the most important concept of the shoulder complex, which is the upward rotator force complex. So this force complex or the force couple is formed mainly by the three muscles. So for upward rotation of the scapulothoracic joint, three main muscles function. First is your serratus anterior, other is your upper trapezius and the lower trapezius. Over here you can see this is the scapula and it is upwardly rotating. In upward rotation, your serratus anterior line of force is like this, and your lower trapezius line of force is this, and this is your upper trapezius line of force. Basically these three, and this is your middle trapezius line of force, this is your deltoid line of force. And I must consider that you all must have seen these types of gates in the gardens or the temples, in which a person comes and holds one of the spoke of the wheel, other person holds the other spoke of the wheel, and the third person holds the other spoke, and then this rotates and we are possible to actually move through this gate. So this is possible in the same, this is possible because all the members of the gate, all the individuals are pressing the gate in a certain direction. So this is how the movement is occurring in the upward direction force couple. So your serratus anterior is pushing this gate like this, your upper trapezius is pushing like this, and your lower trapezius is pushing like this. While upper trapezius and lower trapezius are antagonists to each other, but in the upward rotation they both are working as a synergist in order to upwardly rotate the scapula, and the main force comes from the serratus anterior. But before this, you must understand that the axis of rotation also changes while the abduction of arm is happening. So whenever you are in early phase of shoulder abduction, then the root of the spine is having the fixed axis of rotation. When you are in late phase, which is from 90 degrees to 180 degrees, your axis changes and it comes near the acromion process. So your axis is actually propagating in the upward direction. In the early phase it was at the root of the spine, now it is at the near acromion. And for the upward rotation, all the muscles of all the parts of the trapezius are responsible, and the serratus anterior muscle is responsible. So these muscles drive the scapula to the upward rotation, and equally as important, such as the deltoid and supraspinatus muscle. So these are the main muscles which are causing the upward rotation of the scapulothoracic joint. This is your upper trapezius, lower trapezius, and your serratus anterior. Now let's understand the relationship between all these muscles in the upward rotation range of motion. So this is the arm abduction angle from 0 degrees to nearly 165 degrees. And you can see that this red line is depicting the serratus anterior force of contraction. And on the y-axis we have the EMG activity, and on the x-axis we have the arm abduction angle. So you can notice that the serratus anterior force is always increasing in the abduction angle. Your abduction angle is increasing, and serratus anterior is this muscle. This red is your upper trapezius. This is acting all the time, and also your serratus anterior, which is this dotted line, this is also acting at all the lines. So this dotted line is representing the serratus anterior, and this red line is depicting the upper trapezius, and this black line is depicting the lower trapezius. So in the early phase you can see serratus anterior is functioning for protraction. Also your upper trapezius is elevating the arm, but lower trapezius is not working right now. But after 90 degrees you see there is a linear increase in the lower trapezius force. This is happening because elevation is occurring at the sternoclavicular joint. In order to counteract that elevation, your lower trapezius is acting to depress the elevation of the clavicle, because it is antagonist to the upper trapezius muscle. So in the later stage, when the elevation is at a certain angle, then your lower trapezius starts to act in order to actually counterbalance or antagonist functioning of your upper trapezius muscle. But your upper trapezius is always acting, it is acting over here in order to counteract this lower trapezius muscle. And also your serratus anterior is always acting, because this is the main muscle which is causing the upward rotation. This is the main muscle responsible for the upward rotation, and your red this dotted is your serratus anterior, and this red line is your upper trapezius, which is activated all the times, but your lower trapezius is activated at the end phase. So serratus anterior is the most effective upward rotator due to its largest moment arm. It shows a gradual increase in amplitude throughout the entire range of shoulder abduction. We saw that always your serratus anterior is increasing in the force amplitude. Now lower trapezius has been shown to be particularly active during the later phase of the abduction. During the later phase of abduction, because it has to check the elevation, so it is checking the elevation after a certain angle, so that is why lower trapezius is getting activated in the later phase of your upward rotation. Upper trapezius shows a significant rise in EMG activation level during the initiation of shoulder abduction, then it continues a gradual rise in activation throughout the remaining range of motion. That we have discussed already, that your upper trapezius always act in this arm abduction angle during the upward rotation. Now, initially upward trapezius elevates the clavicle. In later stages, upward trapezius counterbalance the lower trapezius inferior pull. Yes, we have read this thing. During elevation, your serratus anterior and trapezius are synergist, and other than they are agonist and antagonist. So these both muscles are working in these are antagonists, but in upward rotation they are acting in a synergistic manner. This also I have told you earlier. Now, what will be the effect of the paralysis of these upward rotators on the scapulothoracic joint? If your trapezius will get paralyzed, then there will be moderate to marked difficulty in elevating the arm, but full range of motion will still be possible because your serratus anterior is innervated at that time. So, if trapezius gets paralyzed, then if serratus anterior is fine, then you can do the upward rotation. But if your serratus anterior gets paralyzed, then you have seen that the patient gets winging, that we call the winging of the scapula. So what happens is that a patient attempts at elevating the arm, especially against the resistance. So if I am elevating the arm against the resistance, scapula, in which what would that result into? I am elevating the arm, I am doing the abduction with the resistance, it will cause my scapula to rotate downwardly. So what will happen? Because serratus anterior is not working, my scapula will rotate downwardly with medial border flaring outward. So this, what is the downward rotation? This is the downward rotation, and the medial border will come outside. That we see in the case of the serratus anterior paralysis. A person will not be able to elevate the arm above 90 degrees. Because deltoid and supraspinatus have a line of force that rotates the scapula downward. That is why your scapula will more get into downward rotation, as there is no muscle to check the deltoid and supraspinatus. So your medial border will be getting flaring outwardsly. Your medial border will get flared outwards because of the paralysis of the serratus anterior. Now, serratus anterior weakness can be seen in the patient, not a complete paralysis will always be present. So what will that result into? It will result into decrease in the amount of upward rotation torque. So without the upward rotation of the scapula, the acromion is more likely to intervene with the arthrokinematics of the abducting humeral head. Which means if your scapula is not in upward direction, we know that 5 degree upward rotation of glenoid fossa is present. If upward rotation of the scapula is not happening, then there are chances of developing the impingement. What will happen? Your humerus head will go and collide with the acromion, and the structures which are present between them will get ruptured, like your supraspinatus muscle, long head of the biceps, subacromial bursa. And also this was seen that in the chronic impingement syndrome, they have reduced upward rotation of scapula and reduced relative EMG activity from serratus anterior during abduction. It is very important in the patients of the impingement. We should acknowledge the weakness of the serratus anterior and we must treat it, because serratus anterior is an important muscle for the shoulder joint, especially in the case of impingement, because it maintains the upward rotation of the scapula. So these are some researches which actually helps in stating that the alteration in shoulder kinematics and muscle activity, especially your serratus anterior muscle activity, is decreased in the case of shoulder impingement. Now, this was all about the muscles those are elevating the arm, like your flexors, your abductors. Also, there are some rotator cuff muscles which are acting during elevation. What is the function of these rotator cuff muscles during elevation? So they have two important functions. First is to regulate the dynamic joint stability. We already have seen that how it regulates the dynamic joint stability. Second is that they are the controllers of the arthrokinematic motion. That we will see how they are going to control the arthrokinematic movements at the joint. First of all, what happens is your supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor and subscapularis comes and they blend with the capsule in order to provide the dynamic stability. This happens. So let's see, understand this by this example. You can see this is the head of the humerus, and in this is rolling. The external rotation is happening. So rolling is occurring in the posterior direction. This is the anterior side, this is the posterior side. Here the infraspinatus muscle is contracting. But if we know that the infraspinatus muscle is actually blending with the capsule. Because it is blending with the capsule, over here your capsule will not slacken. Their slackening will not occur because there is the contraction of the infraspinatus muscle. Also in the anterior direction, your anterior capsule will be tightened. Also your subscapularis stretch will be there, which is providing the double tensed force. There is the double amount of tension present over here because the muscle is also getting tensed, your ligament is also getting tensed. Over here the slackening is not happening. Slackening of the posterior capsule is not occurring because the muscle is contracting. In order, you will see there is a force from this direction coming in the anterior side, and from this direction there will be a force coming to the posterior side. These two black arrows are actually depicting the forces from the posterior side and anterior side by these muscles, and these will cause the centralization of the humeral head. The dynamic stability is possible because of the centralization of the humeral head, and this centralization of the humeral head is achieved by the forces coming from the anterior and the posterior side, because the muscles are actually blending with the capsule and there is a force which is compressing from the either sides and maintaining this centralization of the humerus. This is why the dynamic stability is achieved by the supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor and subscapularis. So this was the example of the dynamic stability. Now let's understand how the active controllers of how these rotator cuffs are the active controllers of the arthrokinematics at the GH joint. First of all, we will understand about the functioning of the supraspinatus muscle. So supraspinatus muscle, till now we have studied that it compresses the humeral head directly into the glenoid fossa, because it is pulling your humeral head in the upward direction. There is a gravity in the downward direction, and then there is a resultant force which is giving the compression. So this is actually compressing the glenoid fossa in the downward direction. And when you do 90 degrees of abduction, so this is the 90 degree of abduction, then this force is enormous, like maximum force is there by supraspinatus, which is 0.9 times the body weight. It is approximately equal to the body weight. If my body weight is like 76, then at 90 degrees of force, the 76 Newton force will be there at my GH joint by the supraspinatus muscle alone. And for this reason only, that for dissipating this enormous or tremendous amount of force, maximum surface area of the joint is present between the 60 and 120 degrees. Between the 60 degrees and 120 degrees of abduction, maximum amount of surface area is present in order to dissipate this enormous amount of force generated by the compressive capability of the supraspinatus muscle. So this was seen in this. This is the values we got from this study, which was done by N.K. Poppen and P.S. Walker. Now let's understand the functioning of the other muscles in arthrokinematics. Your subscapularis, infraspinatus and teres minor. These muscles produces a inferiorly directed translatory force that will cause the sliding, and sliding is important to prevent the impingement. Also, infraspinatus and teres minor rotates the humeral head externally. Let's do one exercise right now. If I ask you to internally rotate the shoulder and do abduction, you will not be able to do that. Fine. Now externally rotate the shoulder and do abduction, you will be able to do that very easily. Why? When you rotate the head of humerus externally, there is a space formed between the acromion and the head of the humerus. That will cause the abduction. But if you rotate it internally, that space is occupied by the head of the humerus and you will not be able to do the abduction. If your external rotators like infraspinatus and teres minor are ruptured, then there will be the chances of impingement because your external rotation cannot occur. So we have seen that how this is arthrokinematics is possible. Good arthrokinematics is seen by the rotator cuff muscles. Like your supraspinatus is providing the compressive force, your subscapularis, infraspinatus and teres minor are giving the slide force in the downward direction, and infraspinatus and teres minor is rotating the humeral head externally. Now you must now when you will start seeing the patients of the shoulder joint, you will see that the most common muscle that is getting injured in the rotator cuff is your supraspinatus muscle. The question arises over here is, what makes the supraspinatus so vulnerable for the injury? What are the factors that cause only this muscle to get ruptured at the shoulder joint compared to the other muscles like infraspinatus, teres minor and subscapularis? They are not getting injured that much. Their epidemiological incidence is very low if we compare them with the supraspinatus. What is the reason behind it? So first of all, it is the most utilized muscle of the shoulder. This is responsible for the static stability also, it is responsible for the dynamic stability also, and it is helping in abduction. So it is doing a lot of functions, so it is always active, it is responsible for so many things. It is the, so that is why it is the most utilized muscle. Also, when we were discussing the lever, then I told you a concept of mechanical advantage, which was mechanical advantage formula was internal moment arm upon external moment arm, or the external torque upon the internal torque. Fine. So mechanical advantage is internal moment arm upon external moment arm. For supraspinatus muscle, it is 1/20, which means that for lifting 1 kg of force, supraspinatus muscle has to produce 20 kgs of force, because there is mechanical disadvantage of 20, which means that supraspinatus muscle has to produce more forces in order to lift a little weight. Why? Because there is disparity in this mechanical advantage. Fine. So that makes the supraspinatus more vulnerable compared to any other muscle. Now this was all about the muscles that elevate the shoulder joint. Now let's understand the muscles that adduct and extend the joint. The muscles that adduct and extend the joint have largest isometric torque in the shoulder. Over here you will see that amongst all these muscles, you can see these are the flexors, they have the torque of 566. In them, your adductors is 1051 and your extensors is 812. Maximum amount of isometric torque capability is present in your adductor and extensors compared to any other muscles of the shoulder joint. This is the reason that latissimus dorsi is so much crucial in the patients who are ambulating with the help of a crutch. So latissimus dorsi helps in the crutch ambulation as a substitute for a weak or paralyzed hip flexor. In this image also you will see this person is actually moving the crutch in the forward direction, then he is extending the arm. So in this manner he is able to actually ambulate in the forward direction. These 7 are the primary muscles which cause the adduction and external rotation. Let's see them one by one. So this is the muscle which is your latissimus dorsi. This is originating from the iliac crest. This is a powerful extensor muscle and adductor also. From T7 to L5 it is coming. Inferior angle of the scapula, it is originating from the thoracolumbar fascia or aponeurosis, it is coming and getting inserted at the floor of the bicipital group. This is your pectoralis major muscle. This is originating from, there is a clavicular head which originates from the clavicle. There is a head, sternal head, which originates from the upper 6 ribs. This muscle moves like this, and in bilaminar tendon insertion, this gets inserted at the bicipital groove. It gets inserted at the which lip? Lateral lip of the bicipital groove. Your latissimus dorsi, it gets inserted at the medial lip of the bicipital groove, and in between them it gets inserted, I'm so sorry, your latissimus dorsi gets inserted at the floor of the bicipital groove, and your pectoralis major gets inserted at the lateral lip of the bicipital groove. And this is there are lady between 2 major, which means that there is a latissimus dorsi which is between 2 majors, that is your pectoralis major and teres major muscle. Now this is your teres minor muscle. This gets originated from the lateral aspect of the scapula, lateral edge of the scapula, and it gets inserted on your greater tubercle. There is this triceps muscle. The triceps muscle have 3 heads. First is the lateral head, long head, and the medial head. Long head originates from the infraglenoid tubercle, lateral head from the posterior humerus, and the medial head just beneath the posterior humerus, and it gets inserted at the olecranon process. This is the teres major muscle. This gets originated from the inferior angle of the scapula and gets inserted at the medial lip of the bicipital groove that I told you earlier. On the lateral lip it is your pectoralis major, on the medial lip it is your teres major, and in between them there is latissimus dorsi. This is the picture depicting the, now this was all about the adductors and external rotator muscles. Now we will see about the internal and external rotator muscles. So this is the example depicting you the internal rotator muscles, how they are causing the internal rotation. So this is your pectoralis major muscle, which is responsible for the internal rotation. Also teres major muscle is there, and the subscapularis muscle, and also to some extent your latissimus dorsi is acting for the internal rotation. Interaction, there is an interaction. When we saw the abduction or elevation of the arm, we studied about the force couple of the upward rotation. The upward rotation force couple was formed by the upper trapezius, lower trapezius, and by the serratus anterior. There is a force couple for the downward rotation also, and it is formed by the adductors and extensors. So you can see this is your teres major line of force, and this is the line of force of latissimus dorsi. This is the line of force of rhomboides major and rhomboides minor. This is your posterior deltoid, and this is the line of force for infraspinatus and teres minor. These all the forces combine and cause the downward rotation of the scapula. This is the force couple of the scapular downward rotation. Whenever a person is doing the horizontal extension, so you see this archer, he is doing horizontal extension. The horizontal extension is possible by the muscle which is called as the posterior deltoid, and this is posterior deltoid is a distal mobilizer, and this is possible to do the extension by the posterior deltoid because the your proximal stabilizer, your latissimus dorsi is over here, which is acting to stabilize the scapula. So in archer you will see there is the hypertrophy of the latissimus dorsi and the hypertrophy of the posterior deltoid muscle, though these both the muscles are important for the horizontal extension. Now the muscles that internally and externally rotate. So primary muscles that internally rotate are your subscapularis, anterior deltoid, pectoralis major, latissimus dorsi, and teres major. Over here we already saw what is the pectoralis major origin insertion, we already saw what is the origin insertion of teres major, and all the other muscles we have already studied. Now there is one important thing that you should know. Total mass of the internal rotators is more than the external rotators, which makes internal rotators more strong compared to the external rotators. So the torque generation capacity of your internal rotators is approximately 1.75 times the external rotators. 2 times stronger, your internal rotators are 2 times stronger than your external rotators. This is important in understanding a very important clinical significance, that why most of the time your external rotators are injured in the rotator cuff. Fine. So external rotator muscles, we know that this is your infraspinatus, teres minor, and posterior deltoid, and they have the smallest torque producing muscle in the shoulder. These are the origin and insertion of these muscles. Now an important thing, that external rotators still are as I told you, that external rotators are the muscles that gets injured a lot of times. Why they are getting injured, why they are more prone to injury? The reason is that your external rotation has to generate a high velocity concentric contraction when you are cocking backward. So whenever you are throwing something, you are cocking backward, right? You are cocking like this. You are storing the elastic energy over here that you are going to transfer by doing the internal rotation. You will throw the ball or something else. What you are doing is you are doing the external rotation, and you are doing this in high velocity, which is imposing a lot of demand on these external rotators muscle. Also, what you are doing now, you are going to internally rotate forcefully. Now again external rotators have to contract in order to control. They are acting in the eccentric way in order to decelerate the internal rotation peak velocity. So the peak velocity of the internal rotation can be around 7000 degrees per second, and external rotator muscles have to act in an eccentric way in order to control that velocity. Around 7000 degrees per second velocity will be controlled by these small external rotators, and the torque producing capacity is also less. So these large demands on these small muscles often leads to their injury, resulting into the rotator cuff syndrome. So this is the reason why you will see most of the time in the athletes who throw, most of the times in overhead athletes who throw the balls, or they spike, or they smash, like in volleyball or in basketball, you will see that external rotators are getting injured most of the time. Why they are getting injured? Because the muscles mass is less, muscles torque producing capability is less, but the demands on the muscles is very high. This is the reason that is causing their injury and leading to rotator cuff syndrome. Now this was all about the biomechanics of the glenohumeral joint, in which we studied all the things, pure periarticular connective tissue. Before that we saw that scapulothoracic joint movement, we studied osteokinematics, arthrokinematics, we saw scapulohumeral rhythm, we saw static stability, dynamic stability, we saw why posterior rotation of the clavicle is important. Then we saw the force couple, how the muscles are interacting, we saw the downward couple also. So we saw how the rotator cuff muscles are actively controlling the arthrokinematic movement. So this is all we studied in this lecture. If there are any doubts, then you can always mail to us, or you can comment down in the comment section. We'll try to reach to you as soon as possible. Before ending today's slide, there are some questions for you. First question is this: what type of a joint is the glenohumeral joint? And you must answer amongst these options in the comment section what is the correct answer. Other question is that which of the following movement is not primarily associated with the glenohumeral joint? These are very easy questions, I must say. You should answer them in the comment section. This is the third question: which muscles plays a crucial role in stabilizing the glenohumeral joint? Your fourth question is the glenoid cavity of the scapula articulates with which bony structures of the humerus? Again a very easy question. What is the primary function of the labrum in the glenohumeral joint? Which ligament helps preventing excessive anterior translation of the humerus in the glenohumeral joint? So this was all for today's lecture. I hope you have watched it thoroughly and understood the concept, because this was a very important topic. The lecture was also very long. So please make sure that you all study this topic in very detail and understand the basic concept behind it, because this will help you in treating the patients of the shoulder pain very easily if you understand the biomechanics. So biomechanics is the base which will help you in treat the patients of the rotator cuff or supraspinatus tendinitis, bicipital tendinitis, frozen shoulder, or anything like any symptom associated with the shoulder. You will see the patients will be there. And please do one thing, that whenever you are treating the patients with the shoulder joint, make sure that you are always concerned with the sternoclavicular joint also, acromioclavicular joint also, and also with this scapulothoracic joint and thoracic spine, because all these things function in the conjunction, all these things function together. So we know that 120 degrees just come from the GH joint, rest 60 degrees come from all these SC and AC. So always consider them also as the part of treatment, and make sure you correct the alignment of the scapula, you assess the patient in a good manner and treat them accordingly. Thank you so much everyone. That was all for today's lecture. Hope you enjoyed it.